Bonjour. Welcome to Wahsa Citizens Education Center's radio Zoom classes. This is MBF3C, grade 11 college math, and I'm the teacher Bronwyn Slate. If you'd like to participate live today, you can call the Wahsa studio at 1-800-465-7144 or 737-4017. You can listen on the radio at 91.9 FM and also on the television at Bell Express View channel 972. You are always welcome to join me live through the Zoom link, which is available both from me, your teacher, and also your DEC. Our classes are scheduled Monday through Thursday from 10 until 11 in the morning, and we are in our 7th week of our 9-week course. At this point, you definitely should be submitting work for marking. So a reminder that the support questions, the ones with little pencil icon, are not for marking. These are practice problems. You decide which ones and how many to do. If you understand a concept, feel free to skip. It's okay. You do what you need to do. You know yourself best, but I still strongly encourage you to do some of the practice problems. Answers are in the back of your booklet, so you can check your work to make sure you're on the right track. If you seem to be on the right track, it's okay to not do all of the practice problems. The key questions are the ones with the little key icon, and these are the ones to submit for marking. So these ones, you have to do all of them because I'm marking all of them, so do them all. Also, I strongly encourage you to show all of your work, your steps, and your thinking. This way I can understand what it is that you understand. And if you're struggling with anything, I have more information and can help you more with more information. So how do you submit your work for marking? Well, there's 3 methods. The first is to scan your work and send it in electronically. If you have a device, an Apple devices have a Notes app and Android devices have a Google Drive app that are free apps that come with these devices. Then you can scan. They're basically like taking a picture, pointing and clicking. But on my YouTube channel, there are tech tutorial videos that walk you step by step to learn how to use these apps. So that's a good place to go if you want to scan your work. Just means that the files are smaller and a little bit easier to send. You don't have to, you can do picture if that's the best thing for you, but this is a good option if you can. Also, feel free to ask me questions if you need help with it. Then you can send it to me through either email to studentwork@nnec.on.ca and CC it to bronwyn.slate@nnec.on.ca. Or you can also send it to me through Facebook Messenger, where my name is B. Slate Wahsa. The second method is to drop your work off into Lookout. We have an outdoor box at 74 Front Street. We're the bright red building next to the post office and have a small white mailbox next to our side entrance. Just put your work in there at any time and I'll get it back to you as soon as I can. The third method is to hand your work into your DEC. Your DEC can either send you work through the Express or fax it to 807-737-1732 or toll-free fax to 1-800-463-7852. Students can also send their work in through the fax, but just give us a heads up that it's coming because sometimes things get lost. If you'd like to connect with me through social media, both my Facebook and YouTube channel are under the name B. Slate Wahsa. All of our radio Zoom classes are recorded and then uploaded to YouTube under a playlist called MBF3C, and then I share them on Facebook. So these are really easy ways to find all of our lessons. Also, there are short videos that explain common errors and confusing concepts. So that is another good place to look if you are struggling with something that's not necessarily in one of our lessons, but there might be a video there that walks you through some of those foundational skills. Math is a really visual subject, so I strongly encourage you to access the videos. This is going to set you up for the most success and the most understanding. So either watch me live on Zoom. You don't have to talk to me. That's fine. But just watching is good. Or you can watch the YouTube videos. That's also fine. If neither of those options work for you, let me know and I'm happy to send you a copy of the recordings so that you still get the full experience and really can set yourself up for the most success. So if you have any questions, please reach out and connect with me. Give me an email at bronwyn.slate@nnec.on.ca. Send me a message on Facebook at bslate-wahsa. Give me a call at the office at 807-737-1488, extension 2209, or toll free 1-800-667-3703. My office hours are Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m., but I teach from 9 until 11 in the morning. So that is not a good time to try to get a hold of me. Leave me a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So today we are starting lesson 4, unit 4, our last unit. So this is lesson 16, and we're looking at sampling data. Our learning goals are that at the end of this lesson, you will understand the difference between population and sample, and you'll be able to describe and compare sampling techniques. So you know that you've accomplished these learning goals because you can distinguish between population and sample, and you can identify 6 different sampling techniques and the benefits and challenges of each. When we'll use this in real life? Well, knowledge is power. So understanding how media and reports are reporting information, are providing you with information. So knowing how they collect it and how they sample it, who they're talking to can really empower you in terms of understanding how that information might be skewed in one direction or another, and how they might be misleading. Though the information may be accurate, it may be misleading due to the tactics that the reporter is using. So it's really important to be a critical literacy, media literacy consumer, so that you don't just believe everything that is out there. But first, let's activate our brain with some mental math to get us going. I don't believe in mad math minutes. They cause stress and anxiety, do more harm than help, I usually believe. So we don't do things like that. Instead, we focus on developing strategies and skills that are based on our comfort and our knowledge of numbers and how to combine them. So our question today is 15 times 36, and we're going to be using the strategy of doubling and halving. Now, with these strategies, you don't have to actually just double or halve. You don't just have to use a factor of 2. You can use a factor of 3, a factor of 5. You can decide what makes sense for you, but you also can double and halve. So here, 15 times 36, well, I'm going to say 36, I can divide by 2, and 30 divided by 2 is 15. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So 36 divided by 2 is 18. So if I divide that one by 2, I'm going to multiply this one, get 15 by 2. So that 15 times 2 is 30. Then I can do it again. 18 divided by 2 is 9. 30 doubled is 60. So now 9 I can't divide by 2 again because it is an odd number. I'm going to get a fraction, and that's not going to be helpful for me. But I do know that 9 is divisible by 3. So I can divide it by 3, and it's 9 divided by 3 is 3. And then I can multiply the other side by 3. So even though I'm changing my factor, I can still do that because I'm doing the same across this line. This is what's important, that I'm decreasing 1 by 1 factor and increasing it by the same factor. So 60 times 3 is going to be 180. And then again, I can divide 3 by 3 and multiply 180 by 3. And that's going to give me 180 times 3 is 100 times 3 is 300. 80 times 3 is 240. So that's going to be 540. So this equals, because 540 times 1 is 540. So you can start with one factor and change to another. We could have done use a different factor. Again, there's so many different ways that you can do these kinds of questions that you figure out what makes the most sense for you. All right, mine's on. What do I want us to be thinking about a little bit today as we look at different sampling techniques? So I just want to sort of show you where statistics shows up in our lives. And we're going to be looking at the background information about how these statistics are gathered. But this is how they're presented to us so that you can start to think critically about the media that you're consuming and where this information is coming from. So the study of statistics is the collection, analysis, and interpretation of data, as well as the effective communication and presentation of results relying on that data. So that basically means that statistics and data shape our understanding of the world around us. It isn't always numbers and graphs, though sometimes it is, but it also can be words and pictures in terms of how that information is shared with you. So let's look at a few headlines that may or may not have numbers in them or graphs, but are using data behind the scenes in order to get us to believe something. So this is comparing two Express headlines, which is a media source in the UK, I believe. So one picture is of Kate and Prince William, and it says Kate's morning sickness cure, Prince William gifted with a avocado for pregnant Duchess. So here saying that having an avocado is helping Kate in her morning sickness and her pregnancy, and isn't that sweet of Prince William to do this? This is sort of how that's framing it. Whereas it's comparing to Meghan Markle's beloved avocado linked to human rights abuse and drought. So here we are villainizing Meghan Markle for eating avocados and how the connecting it to, so having this negative view of it being a human rights abuse and drought environmental issue. Not saying that it isn't, these aren't concerns, but the fact that we have one royal lady being praised for eating an avocado, and so this media is trying to say positive things about this person, and one royal lady who the media is saying negative things about this person, when we're talking about the same thing, we're talking about an avocado. So this is how we present information skews our information. There's been lots of analysis about the racism within the media when it comes to Meghan Markle and how that is a big issue. And so that's part of what's underlying here with this seemingly simple headlines that are talking about avocados. Really, we're talking about other things as well. So then another, this is like an infographic thing. So there's many headlines out there that villainize victims. So here, the original headline from a news source somewhere was that woman was flirty and very friendly in the hours before she was allegedly raped. So then there's been a movement to fix headlines in terms of identifying violence and the representation of women in the media. So instead, so fixing the headline and saying man accused of rape says that the alleged victim chatted to people at party. So that really changes the way that we look at this situation. Just the changing of that language has a big impact about our perception of the people involved in this assault. So again, there's no numbers, there's no graphs, but the way that you can track this information with statistics, even seeing how many of our headlines are violence, continued violence against women, is something to be paying attention to. Here, another one, we have the original headline is adult children are costing many parents their retirement savings. It's from CBS News, it's a tweet. And then the response is young adults are being forced to rely on help from parents to survive due to overwhelming student loan debt and crippling low wages. Then it says there, fix your headline. So again, the original headline is putting the blame on adult children, on young adults trying to survive in our economy, instead of looking at the overarching issues of systemic oppression that are the reasons why folks are are relying on their parents for help is because of our economy and because we have our capitalist system is not setting youth up for success, but are, like it says, loading people down with tons of debt and then not paying people living wages. So again, no numbers, but there's a lot going on in these headlines that we need to critically think about. And then finally, we have two images that are this is a little bit older, but I think still really relevant. So two images that are the first photos released by the media of these two young men. One, we have a in-color picture of a white young man in his school uniform. It looks like it's a school photograph. He's in a suit and tie. He's smiling. He's blonde, blue-eyed, pale skin. And this is what the media released. This young man, whose name I don't remember because I don't think he needs more acknowledgement, is that he was caught in the act of raping an unconscious woman. So he's a rapist, but he looks like a charming young man in his image. Whereas the other image that we're contrasting with, it's a black and white picture of a black young man who has a hood up and is not smiling. And so looks like many people probably would categorize this as like a thug picture, which has its own racist connotations. But this person is Trayvon Martin, who was murdered after buying snacks from the store. He was shot because he was a black man walking down the street. So the media, by the pictures that they're showing, is, again, we are villainizing victims and celebrating perpetrators in terms of to perpetuate white supremacy and patriarchy, capitalism. All of these things are happening within these seemingly simple ways that the media presents information. So this is what I mean in terms of knowledge is power, and why being critical about the media that we're consuming and having an understanding, having media literacy is really, really important, because media world skews the information that we are given. And so it's important to be critical and to be thinking about what's going on. So that's my little rant outside of the math concepts that we're going to be learning today that are all sort of happening in the background about how these media build this information, how reports build this information, how all of our institutions build information is based off of statistics that seem like they might be simple, but have huge impacts on our world in general. All right, so let's look at these new concepts today. So statistics, again, looking at some numbers and graphs, because this is, again, everywhere around us. So we looked at media in terms of headlines and images, but also just in terms of where we can actually still see these sorts of reports, and understanding that is also really important. So I grabbed the COVID-19 data from last March. So it's a year old, but you can see how being able to interpret the peaks and falls of this data, of this graph, really gives us information so that we can see how concerning at different periods of times, and looking at sort of those trends about COVID-19 and making decisions about how to keep ourselves healthy and how to keep our communities healthy. Also, here we have a infographic I grabbed from the Government of Canada website about Aboriginal languages in Canada, which just, again, shows us very simplistic information of where a couple of different Aboriginal languages are spoken. And in 2016, now, of course, with government information, this is all going to be a bit old because it takes a while to be processed, to be collected, as we'll see as we talk about. So this information is sampled and collected, but then it takes a while to be processed and to these infographics to be created. So it always seems like this data is a little bit old. And then also where these languages are spoken throughout Canadian provinces and territories. This other graphic that I grabbed from online is looking from poverty rates in Canada. And we can see it's comparing Indigenous children to non-Indigenous children in Canadian provinces. And we can see that Indigenous children are these orange bubbles, and they're showing us that they're larger. It's by scale, so the larger the bubble, the more poverty. And we can see that in all provinces that we're looking at, that there is more poverty experienced by Indigenous children than by non-Indigenous children. And again, that is just going to show in terms of a conversation about systemic racism and how this has impacts. And then finally, this last chart that I grabbed from the Statistics Canada website is looking at age-specific suicide rates among First Nations males living on reserve and non-Indigenous males in Canada. So comparing to Indigenous and non-Indigenous men. So looking at how, again, we have a much higher rate of suicide in Indigenous men living on reserve than in non-Indigenous men living in Canada off reserve. And so that tells us, again, information about not just about men and suicide, but also about systemic oppression and racism, and not meeting the needs of individuals and support systems. So again, you can gather a lot of information just from these graphs and numbers. But understanding the vocabulary is something that is going to help. So first, we need to look at population, so you know what it is that I'm talking about and what statistics are talking about. And this is starting on page 2 of your IL booklet. So the population is the entire group of individuals that is being considered. So everybody, either we're talking about people or we're talking about items, population is everything, everybody. A sample is a small group of items or individuals chosen to represent the total population. So it's just a part of the whole, but ideally a good sample, one that is accurate and ethical, is one that represents the total population, opposed to one that doesn't. We'll continue to talk about that later. Primary source data is data that you collect. It's collected by the person who's doing the report, who's going to use the information. Secondary source data is data that has already been collected and is made available to the public. So everything that I looked at today, we talked about already today, is secondary source data. I did not do any of the surveying, collecting of any of the information. I have found it from other places, and other people have provided that information to me. So again, that's where I need to be critical, because I don't have, it's being interpreted by someone else, and then I'm interpreting it as well. A census is a survey of the entire population. So asking everybody in the population questions, opposed to just a sample or just a part. So why is sampling necessary? So why is it necessary to, if getting information about everybody is important, why do we sometimes just ask part of the population? Well, because sampling can be incredibly time consuming. When we are, surveying the entire population, doing census is really time consuming. So it's a lot of data to process, which is also time consuming, and it can be difficult to gather information from everybody. So if we're going to sample, what makes a good sample? Like I said before, a good sample represents the population as a whole. What's a biased sample is a sample that does not represent of the population as a whole. So here, I don't know, that's not coming in. That's weird. So a reliable survey is a survey that can duplicate its results in another survey. So that means that we can see that if we ask a different group of people, we get similar results. It's not going to be exactly the same. We get similar results, and this means that both our survey is reliable and also our sampling technique, how we're picking our people, is reliable, and we're not having a biased sample where it is just people who are very similar or not representative of the whole group. So when we're selecting a sample, we need to look at, there's a couple of different ways, there's a bunch of different ways we can do it. We're going to look at 6. So a sample of population is representative if it has the same characteristics as the whole population, and a sample is random if every member has an equal chance of being selected. So here we have a sample we can see is, we have, of all of our people, we have a whole bunch of green people. So this infers that of our population, we have more green people than purple people, than orange people. That's what a good sample will tell us. So if that's, these are just, colors are just to sort of see. So if this is what our sample looks like, that means that we are concluding that our whole population looks like this in proportional. So we only have one orange person. That means that we have very few orange people in general. So orange is the least number of people. So that makes sense. The middle number of people are the purple people. That makes sense in our population. The most are the green people. That's what makes sense in our population. So that is a good representation, because even if the numbers are not exactly proportional, they give us a rough idea of something that is realistic. So a bias sample, again, remember, biased is the prejudice in favor of or against one thing, a person, or a group compared to another, usually in a way that's considered to be unfair. So this is when the population does not represent, the sample does not represent the whole population. So here we have our sample, and we have a bunch of green and a purple. So this infers in our population, well, if our population is the same as the population before, but this is our sample, and we don't have any of the orange people, so there's no representation of those people. We have very little representation of our purple people because we only have one. And we have much representation of our green people, because though they are the most, because we have more representation compared to the purple and the orange people, then we're not going to get their voices to be heard, which is what makes it a biased sample. We're only going to hear really the green voices, which is problematic. Sorry, I seem to have some issues with my slides. Okay, types of sampling. This is on page 3. So first we have a simple random sample. So this means that every member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. So here in my graphic, we have our population are all of these dots, and we randomly pick 5 dots. That's our sample. So an example of this is pulling names out of a hat, or if researchers begin a list of telephone numbers from a database of all cell phone numbers and landlines in a country, then use a computer to randomly dial numbers. The researcher can sample a group of people, ensuring a simple random sample. So it's just randomly picking people of all the people. The pros are that usually this sample represents the target population and eliminates sampling bias, because there's no other thought behind it. It's just randomly picking numbers. The disadvantage is that it can be difficult to achieve. So it's time consuming and it costs a lot of money. And then there's also systematic barriers resulted in bias sampling. So it believes that you're unbiased, but if, say, you're pulling names out of a hat, but every person in the group needs to write their name on a piece of paper, but not everybody can write, then those people can't actually be can't be chosen, because they're not going to write their name on on the paper. Or if people don't have a cell phone number or a landline, then their voices can't be heard because they're not going to be on the list. So things like that you think that it's being fair, but unless you're looking at the deeper rooted systemic barriers, you might be missing information. So the second type of sampling is systematic sampling, which is when every member of the population is listed with a number, but instead of randomly generating numbers, individuals are chosen at regular intervals. So, for example, all employees of a company are listed in alphabetical order. From the first 10 numbers, you randomly select a starting point. So say 6. Then from 6 onwards, every 10th person of the list is selected. So 6, 16, 26, 36, and so on, until you end up with a sample of 100 people. So just another way of organizing your information. The pros of this is that, again, it should represent the target population and eliminate sampling bias, and is simpler to execute than random sampling. The cons are that it's hard to do this without a list of all of the members of your population. So if you don't have a way to organize everybody, if you don't have everyone's names or identifiers, then you can't actually do this. The third type is called cluster sampling. And this involves dividing the population into subgroups. but each subgroup should have similar characteristics. So each subgroup should be representative of the whole. And then instead of sampling individuals, you randomly select an entire subgroup. So for example, you want to know how many high school students in Northwestern Ontario drank alcohol last year. So you could study this issue by taking a list of all high schools in the area and randomly selecting a portion of the schools. So the schools will be the clusters. And then you could survey the students within that selected school. So it can be really good for dealing with large and dispersed populations if people are all over the place, and it can be fast and efficient. The cons are that there's a risk of error in the sample because there could be really big differences between your clusters. It's hard to guarantee that they all are completely representative of the whole population. So like if you think about my example, if we pick a high school in, say we pick high school in KI and a high school in Kenora, then those, are they really going to represent the whole population? Or if we only pick, we pick high school in KI, high school in Sandy Lake, then that doesn't talk about the high school in Thunder Bay or in Port Francis or like the various different places, right? So is that really representative? Can we really say that they are able to do it? Probably not for this example. Number 4 is stratified random sample. So the population is divided into subgroups, and then a random sample is selected from each subgroup proportional to the size of that subgroup. So, for example, a company has 790 female employees, 190 male employees, and 20 non-binary employees. We want to ensure that the sample reflects the gender balance of the company. So we sort the population into the 3 strata based on gender. And then we use a random sampling on each group, selecting 79 women, 19 men, and 2 non-binary folk, which gives us a representation sample of 100 people and means that we're getting the right proportions based on that gender classification. So the pros are that it should be highly representative of the target population, and therefore we can generalize the results obtained. The cons are that gathering this kind of sample is extremely time consuming and can be difficult to do. And then also the subgroups are defined by the surveyors and might not accurately represent the population. So who gets to decide? Many places might just decide that they're comparing male and female employees, and that is enough of a stratification for people by gender if they're thinking about gender in a binary, but that eliminates a lot of other voices. And even with my example of having female, male, and non-binary example employees, that still erases various voices, and life is not that simplistic. Also, saying that 79 women, their experience is exactly the same as 790 women in total is not realistic, because every woman's experience is different. Every male's experience is different. Every non-binary person's experience is different. So saying that these people are the voices for all of these other people is problematic, but that's how the sampling system works. Number 5, convenient sample, is including only the individuals who are most accessible and available to participate in the study. So you are picking who is easy to pick. So for example, you're researching opinions about services available in Indigenous communities, and you ask your family members to complete a survey on the topic. This is a convenient way to gather data, but as you only survey people in your family, this is not going to represent all Indigenous communities. So again, if you live in Cat Lake and you ask your family in Cat Lake, then you're going to find information about services probably in Cat Lake, but that is not going to be the same thing as if you're in Bearskin, or it's not going to be the same thing as if I, who live in Sioux Lookout and am white, if I ask my family members their understanding of services available in Indigenous communities, because none of them are Indigenous and none of them live in those communities, it's going to be not accurate at all, right? So that is really going to change the information based on who you are and who you're asking. So the pros are that it's easy and it's inexpensive because you're asking people who are easy to ask. But the cons are there's no way to tell if the sample is representative of the population, and so you can't produce generalizable results, which is often the goal when you're doing studies. And then finally, number 6 is the self-selected or voluntary sample. So this is when interested people usually take part by themselves by filling in some sort of survey forms. So you put the information out there and people choose it themselves if they're going to do it. So for example, after a business provides a service or good, they often ask customers to report on their satisfaction because the business is asking all customers to volunteer their thoughts. The sample is voluntary and susceptible to bias. The pros, again, are that it's quick and easy. The cons are that it's probably going to be somewhat biased because some people are inherently more likely to volunteer information than others. So usually we'll get like extremes in terms of people who are really, really upset about something or really, really happy about something, but all the people in the middle who are kind of like, don't really care, or it's good, but whatever, you're missing out on all that information. Okay, so let's look at some examples. Determine which type of sampling each of the following scenarios is with example and justify your reasoning. Every 152nd person in the phone book is called to do a telephone survey about their political views. So because we have every 152nd person, because we have that number of that is setting up a system, this is systematic. Next, we have Josh was asked only his hockey buddies about which sport is the best. So because Josh is only asking his hockey friends, this is convenience. A company that makes shampoo asked 50 people with coily hair, 50 people with curly hair, 50 people with wavy hair, and 50 people with straight hair about hair products. So this is stratified because each subgroup is people of various hair types. So we're making sure that we're talking to people who are all going to use the product potentially and have the different hair types. Then we have an apartment building. The tenants on floors 2, 5, 9, and 14 are selected to participate in the survey. So this is cluster. All the people living on 4 floors of an apartment building with at least 14 floors were surveyed. So those were the different clusters. The entire population of the inhabitants of a small community, and a small sample is selected at random. So this is a simple random sample because a small group of people were selected at random. And then a Facebook survey where participants are asked whether they are like using Facebook or not. And this is self-selected. People get to choose if they want to use, if they're on Facebook, if they like Facebook, they get to decide if they want to tell that information. Okay, so now you can do the support questions on page 2 and 4, questions 1 and 2. So we're going to do a couple practice problems to just sort of get used to this a little bit. It can be a little tricky to wrap your head around. So number 1, a local high school has 600 students in grade 9, 400 in grade 10, 300 in grade 11, and 200 in grade 12. A sample of 250 students is used to choose which brand of chocolate bar should be sold in the vending machine. How many of the 250 students should be handed out? Surveys should be handed out to each grade. So to me, because we already have 4 different grades, we already have 4 strata, 4 different groups, and then we should do a proportional. So because we have 600 grade 9 students, probably we're going to have more grade 9 students than the 200 grade 12 students who are buying chocolate bars. So their voice should be heard a little bit stronger because there are more of them. So how we figure this out is that we think about, okay, well, how many students do we have in total? So we have 600 plus 400 plus 300 plus 200. So 600 plus 400 is 1,000. 300 plus 200 is 500. So we have 1,500 total students. So then I would figure out the percentages. So for grade 9, we have 600 out of 1,500. So grade 10, we have 400 out of 1,500. For grade 11, we have 300 out of 1,500. And for grade 12, we have 200 out of 1,500. So figuring out the percentage, then we can go from there to figure out how many we need for out of the 250. So we have 0.4, so that's 40%. 300 out of 1,500, well, that's going to be half of that, so that's 20%. Then 400 divided by 1,500 is 0.26666 forever, so that's 27%. And half of that is going to be 13%. And that should add up to 100%. 13 plus 27 is going to be 40, plus 40 is 80, plus 20 is 100. Okay, so then we're going to figure out of the surveys, out of 250 surveys, maybe I should say this. So 40% times 250 is equal to 100. So that means that 20% of 250 is going to be 50. So then 0.27 times 250 for grade 10s is going to be, 67.5. So we're going to say 68 students because we're going to say we have whole students. And then that means that 13% of 250, which was half of that, is going to be 34 students. And again, does that add up to 250? Well, 100 plus 50 is 150. Then 68 plus 34 is 90. 60 plus 30 is 90. 8 plus 4 is 12. Okay, so I probably did something. Thing with these is that rounding them is tricky. Yeah. So when you're going to get something slightly off, but that's okay. No worries. It's not the end of the world. So we're going to ask the most grade 9 students. We're going to ask 100 of them. Then we're going to ask the least grade 12 students. We're only going to ask 34 of them. All right. A political candidate wants to know how the members of his riding feel about a major issue in the upcoming election. He and his team send surveys to every even number address in the riding that has the word street in the address. Each survey contains a self-addressed stamped return envelope for returns. 2 weeks later, 56% of the surveys have been returned. What type of sampling technique was used? So I would say that sometimes you can justify more than one, but I would say that because every even number on streets that have the word street in them, I would say that this is systematic. Sampling, because you have a system. Do you think this is effective? Personally, no, because I think that it is very limiting. A very limited sample. We don't know if there's only 3 streets that say street. If the rest of them, there's 25 that don't say street. We don't have that information. Oh, it's not the same. Sorry. Limited sample. Do you think that the candidate will have enough data to draw accurate conclusions? Again, no, because the sample probably doesn't represent the whole. So I'm not saying that systematic is a bad way to sample, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee, depending on the system that you pick, doesn't guarantee a good representation of your sample or your population. Number 3, a school board received a load of 10,000 graphing calculators to pass out to their high schools. They were concerned with the state of the delivery and therefore with the number of defective calculators. They decided to check them. First 20 calculators were checked and all worked perfectly. So if we just went off that test, it would seem like it all looks good. They all work perfectly. Second, 100 calculators were tested and 2 were broken. So now we're starting to see that some are broken. Third, 1,000 were tested and 15 were broken. So after the first test, would it be fair to say that none of the calculators were broken? Why or why not? So no, again, because it's not a large enough sample. The sample doesn't represent the whole population. And even though the calculators, and you're just selecting at random, 20 out of 10,000 is too small. All right, we're going to quickly consolidate to wrap up today. So this is lesson 16, which was sampling data today. So first we looked at vocabulary. Hopefully you're comfortable with the language of population and sample. And then we looked at the 6 different types of sampling, which is simple random, systematic, cluster, stratified, convenience, and self-selected, also known as voluntary. So that's really just this information. The being able to distinguish between the population and sample is really important, and knowing these 6 different sampling techniques, as well as when they're good to use and when they're not great to use, what the challenges are, is also really important. So if you have any questions about sampling techniques or just general media literacy, feel free to reach out. Give me a call at 807-737-1488, extension 2209, or toll free 1-800-667-3703. Send me an email at work at bronwyn.slate@nnec.owen.ca. Connect with me through Facebook at bslatewasa. Remember, all of our classes are recorded and uploaded to YouTube, where my profile is called bslatewasa, under a playlist called MBF3C, so you can find everything there. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a lovely day, and Miigwech.